Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are back with more Greek mythology out of the book Mythology by Edith Hamilton. Now, we are picking up with lesser gods of Earth. Let's hop into this. Earth herself was called the All-Mother, but she was not really a divinity. She was never separated from the actual Earth and personified. The goddess of the corn, Demeter, or Ceres in Latin, a daughter of Cronus and Rhea, and the god of the vine, Dionysus, also called Bacchus, were the supreme deities of the earth and of the great importance in Greek and Roman mythology. Their stories will be found in the next chapter. The other divinities who lived in the world were comparatively unimportant. Pan was the chief. He was Hermes' son, a noisy, merry god. The Homeric hymn in his honor calls him, but he was part animal too, with a goat's horns and goat's hooves instead of feet. He was the goat herd's god and the shepherd's god, and also the gay companion of the woodland nymphs when they danced. All wild places were his home, thickets and forests and mountains, but best of all, he loved Arcady, where he was born. He was a wonderful musician. Upon his pipes of reed, he played melodies as sweet as the nightingale's song. He was always in love with one nymph or another, but always rejected because of his ugliness. Sounds heard in the wilderness at night by the trembling traveler were supposed to be made by him, so that it is easy to see how the expression panic, fear, arose. Silenus was sometimes said to be Pan's son, sometimes his brother, a son of Hermes. He was a jovial, fat old man who usually rode an ass because he was too drunk to walk. He is associated with Bacchus as well as with Pan. He taught him when the wine god was young, and as is shown by his perpetual drunkenness, after being his tutor, he became his devoted follower. Besides these gods of the earth, there was a very famous and very popular pair of brothers, Castor and Polydeuces, who in most of the accounts were said to live half of their time on earth and half in heaven. They were the sons of Leda and are usually represented as being gods, the special protectors of sailors. Saviors of swift-going ships, when the storm winds rage over the ruthless sea, They were also powerful to save in battle. They were especially honored in Rome, where they were worshipped as the great twin brethren to whom all Dorians pray. But the accounts of them are contradictory. Sometimes Pollux alone is held to be divine, and Castor a mortal who won a kind of half and half immortality merely because of his brother's love. Leda was the wife of King Tyndareus of Sparta, and the usual story is that she bore two mortal children to him, Castor and Clytemnestra, Agamemnon's wife, and to Zeus, who visited her in the form of a swan, two others who were immortal, Pollux and Helen, the heroine of Troy. Nevertheless, both brothers, Castor and Pollux, were often called sons of Zeus. Indeed, the Greek name they were best known by, the Dioscuri, means striplings of Zeus. On the other hand, they were also called sons of Tyndareus, the Tyndaridae. They are always represented as living just before the Trojan War, at the same time as Theseus and Jason and Atalanta. They took part in the Caledonian boar hunt. They went on the quest of the Golden Fleece, and they rescued Helen when Theseus carried her off. But in all the stories, they play an unimportant part, except in the account of Castors' death, when Pollux proved his brotherly devotion. The two went, we were not told why, to the land of some cattle owners, Edus and Lyncaeus. There, Pindar says Edus made angry in some way about the oxen, stabbed and killed Castor. Other writers say the cause of the dispute was the two daughters of the king of the country, Leiokippus, Pollux stabbed Lyncaeus, and Zeus struck Idas with his thunderbolt. But Castor was dead, and Pollux was inconsolable. He prayed to die also, and Zeus, in pity, allowed him to share his life with his brother to live. Half of the time between the earth and half within the golden homes of heaven. According to this version, the two were never separated again. One day they dwelt in Hades, the next in Olympus, always together. The late Greek writer Lucian gives another version in which their dwelling places are heaven and earth, and when Pollux goes to one, Castor goes to the other, so that they are never with each other. In Lucian's little satire, Apollo asked Hermes, "I say, why do we never see Castor and Pollux at the same time?" Well, Hermes replies, they are so fond of each other that when fate decreed one of them must die and only one be immortal, they decided to share immortality between them. Not very wise, Hermes. What proper employment can they engage in that way? I foretell the future. Aesculapius cures diseases. You are a good messenger. But these two, are they to idle away their whole time? No, surely. They're in Poseidon's service. Their business is to save any ship in distress. Ah, now you say something. I'm delighted they're in such a good business. Two stars were supposed to be theirs. The Gemini, the twins. They were always represented as riding splendid snow-white horses, but Homer distinguishes Castor above Pollux for horsemanship. He calls the two Castor, tamer of horses, Polydeuces, good as a boxer. The Sileni were creatures part man and part horse. They walked on two legs, not four, but they often had horses' hooves instead of feet. Sometimes horses' ears, but always horses' tails. There are no stories about them, but they are often seen on Greek vases. The satyrs, like Pan, were goatmen, and like him they had their home in the wild places of the earth. In contrast to these unhuman, ugly gods, the goddesses of the woodland were all lovely maiden forms. The Oreads, nymphs of the mountains, and the Dryads, sometimes called Hamadryads, nymphs of trees, whose life was in each case bound up with that of her tree. Aeolus, king of the winds, also lived on the earth. An island, Aeolia, was his home. Accurately, he was the only regent of the winds, viceroy of the gods. The four chief winds were Boreas, the north wind, in Latin, Aquilo; Zephyr, the west wind, which had a second Latin name, Favonius. Notice the south wind, also called in Latin Auster, and the east wind, or Euris, the same in both Greek and Latin. There were some beings, neither human nor divine, who had their home on the earth. Prominent among them were the Centaurs. They were half man, half horse, and for the most part they were the savage creatures more like beasts than men. One of them, however, Chiron, was known everywhere for his goodness and his wisdom. The Gorgons were also earth dwellers. There were 3, and 2 of them were immortal. They were dragon-like creatures with wings, whose look turned men to stone. Phorcys, son of the seas and the earth, was their father. The Gaiae were their sisters, 3 gray women who had but one eye between them. They lived on the farther bank of ocean. The Sirens lived on an island in the sea. They had enchanting voices, and their singing lured sailors to their death. It was not known what they looked like, or no one who saw them ever returned. Very important, but assigned to no abode, whether in heaven or the earth, were the Fates. Moirae in Greek, Parcae in Latin, who Hesiod says, give to men at birth evil and good to have. They were 3, Clotho, the spinner, who spun the thread of life, Lachesis, the disposer of lots, who assigned to each man his destiny, Atropos, she who could not be turned, who carried the abhorred shears and cut the thread at death. The Roman gods. The 12 great Olympians mentioned earlier were turned into Roman gods also. The influence of Greek art and literature became so powerful in Rome that ancient Roman deities were changed to resemble the corresponding Greek gods and were considered to be the same. Most of them, however, in Rome had Roman names. These were Jupiter for Zeus, Juno for Hera, Neptune for Poseidon, Vesta for Hestia, Mars for Ares, Minerva for Athena, Venus for Aphrodite, Mercury for Hermes, Diana for Artemis, Vulcan or Mulciber for Hephaestus, and Ceres for Demeter. 2 kept their Greek names, Apollo and Pluto, but the latter was never called Hades, as was usual in Greece. Bacchus, never Dionysus, was the name of the wine god, who had also a Latin name, Liber. It was a simple matter to adopt the Greek gods because the Romans did not have definitely personified gods of their own. They were a people of deep religious feeling, but they had little imagination. They could never have created the Olympians, each a distinct, vivid personality. Their gods, before they took over form in took over form from the Greeks were vague, hardly more than those that are above. They were the Nemina, which means the powers or the wills, the will powers, perhaps. Until Greek literature and art centered Italy, the Romans felt no need for beautiful poetic gods. They were a practical people, and they did not care about violet-tressed muses who inspire song, or lyric Apollo making sweet melodies upon his golden lyre, or anything of that sort. They wanted useful gods. An important power, for example, was one who guards the cradle. Another was the one who presides over children's food. No stories were ever told about the Nemina. For the most part, they were not even distinguished as male or female. The simple acts of everyday life, however, were closely connected with them and gained dignity from them, as was not the case with any of the Greek gods except Demeter and Dionysus. The most prominent and revered of them all were the Lares and Penates. Every Roman family had a Lar, who was the spirit of an ancestor, and several Penates, gods of the hearth and guardians of the storehouse. They were the family's own gods, belonging only to it, really the most important part of it, the protectors and defenders of the entire household. They were never worshipped in temples, but only in the home, where some of the food at each meal was offered to them. There were also public Lares and Penates who did for the city what the others did for the family. There were also many Nemina connected with the life of the household, such as Terminus, guardian of the boundaries, Priapus, cause of fertility, Pallas, strength of the cattle, Silvanus, helper of plowmen and woodcutters. A long list could be made. Everything important to the man or to the farm was under the care of a beneficent power, never conceived of as having a definite shape. Saturn was originally one of the Nemina, the protector of the sowers of the seed, as his wife, Ops, was a harvest helper. In later days, she was said to be the same as the Greek. He was said to be the same as the Greek Cronus, and the father of Jupiter, the Roman Zeus. In this way, he became a personality, and a number of stories were told about him in memory of the Golden Age, when he reigned in Italy, the great feast of the of Saturnalia was held every year during the winter. The idea of it was the Golden Age returned to the earth during the days it lasted. No war could be declared. Slaves and masters ate at the same table. Executions were postponed. It was a season for giving presents. It kept alive in men's minds the idea of equality, of a time when all were on the same level. Janus, too, was originally one of the Nemina, the god of good beginnings, which are sure to result in good endings. He became personified to a certain degree. His chief temple in Rome ran east to west, where the day begins and ends, and had two doors between which stood his statue with two faces, one young and the other old. These doors were closed only when Rome was at peace. In the first 700 years of the city's life, they were closed 3 times. In the reign of the good king, Nemina, after the First Punic War, when Carthage was defeated in 241 BC, and in the reign of Augustus, when Milton says, "No war or battle sound was heard the world around." Naturally, his month January began the new year. Faunus was Saturn's grandson. He was a sort of Roman Pan, a rustic god. He was a prophet too, and spoke to men in their dreams. The fauna were Roman satyrs. Quirinius was the name of the deified Romulus and founder of Rome. The Manes were the spirits of the good dead in Hades. Sometimes they were regarded as divine and worshipped. The Lemures or larvae were the spirits of the wicked dead and were greatly feared. The Cominae began as useful and practical goddesses who cared for springs and wells and cured disease and foretold the future. But when the Greek gods came to Rome, the Cominae were identified with the impractical deities, the Muses, who cared only for art and science. Egeria, who taught King Numa, was said to be a Camena. Lucina was sometimes regarded as a Roman Aletheia, the goddess of childbirth. But usually the name is used as an epithet of both Juno and Diana. Pomona and Vertumnus began as Nemina, as powers protecting orchards and gardens, but they were personified later, and a story was told about how they fell in love with each other. So, that ends that chapter. It gives us, a base information on who each god is and how they came into being. One of the things that I like is with the gods, Greek or the Roman versions, you can usually tell what they connect to. Like, you can usually see they influence modern things. Like the Greek satyr Pan. They talk about the expression panic fear, because Pan at night plays his I forgot the name of the instrument. I don't think it was just a flute. It just says the pipes of his reed. So it's not really a flute. It's multiple pieces of reed strapped together to form a single layer. They were of different lengths, and I'm sure they had other parts to them, like holes in them and stuff, but to play it like an instrument. But yeah, Pan gives his name to the word panic. Let's see. You'll hear a lot about Pollux and Castor, like they said. The quest for the Golden Fleece. They were in some of the other major events in history. Yeah, quest for the Golden Fleece. The Caledonian boar hunt, and a rescue of Helen. But they were always known as the brothers who went on a lot of these big quests. The quest for the Golden Fleece, they've made into actual movies a couple of times, I think. Jason and the Argonauts, Quest for the Golden Fleece. He has a crew of many big names in Greek mythology. Hercules, Castor and Pollux, Atalanta. Oh goodness, who was the musician? I can't think of his name. Shoot. He tries to go into Hades to retrieve his wife. Or the woman he was in love with. And almost succeeds, but yeah. But we'll get to that story eventually. But yeah, you'll see other names who gave their the names themselves to certain words you recognize. Centaurs, of course, is a classic monster of Greek mythology. Gorgons, and of course, of the Gorgons, Medusa is perhaps the most famous. Let's see. Uh, the Graye. I'm butchering the name, I know I am. The basically three sisters with one eye amongst them. They've had roles in movies as well. I can't remember which movie it is. I'm wanting to say it's The Quest for the Golden Fleece as well. They encounter the sisters and end up taking their eye so they can find where they need to go and everything. So yeah, because they treat it as kind of like a crystal ball. Sirens. That's in the Odyssey. Out of the Iliad and Odyssey. When Odysseus tries to return home. And then Roman gods. You'll notice a lot of the Roman names of the gods are planets. Jupiter, Neptune, Mars, Venus, Mercury. So yeah. The Romans did have their own gods, but they weren't really given the kind of personas the way the Greek gods were. I think the Romans were just like, that is interesting. We need to do that. But yeah. But next chapter, we start the actual history of Greek mythology. I believe that's where it is. Yeah, I'm just looking through this next chapter here. Bear with me a moment. I've read this book before on my own, but I can't remember everything. Okay. Two Great Gods of Earth will be the title of the next chapter. But anyway, as always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.